There's a type of exhaustion that doesn't stem from physical exertion or lack of sleep. It's a silent weariness that sets in slowly, almost imperceptibly, until one day the man realizes that something inside him no longer reacts as before. He continues to function, continues to do what needs to be done, but internally he feels as if he is carrying a burden that no one else sees. This is the psychological exhaustion that destroys men in modern relationships. And the most dangerous thing is that it rarely explodes. It corrodes, consumes, and fades away little by little. This exhaustion begins when the man realizes that everyone expects something from him. Stability, strength, presence, patience, emotional clarity, initiative. He is expected to be the safe haven, the firm rock, the emotional leader. And when he tries to show fragility, he is often seen as weak, dramatic, or less of a man. It is at this point that he begins to fall silent. Not because he doesn't feel, but because he has learned that feeling too much can be costly. Over time, he begins to live in an invisible survival mode, doing everything right, giving his all, but receiving less and less understanding. And when he realizes he's emotionally drained, it's already too late because the relationship has somehow already begun to break down from the inside. This is the beginning of the spiral. And in the next chapter, you'll see how this silent wear and tear begins to transform into behavior, even when he swears he's okay. If this topic is already making sense to you, and you want to deeply understand this dynamic that destroys so many men, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment, "I want part 2, because this can completely change your view on relationships. With the psychological wear and tear growing silently, the man enters a state that few women immediately notice: automatic mode. He continues to respond to messages, continues to go to work, continues to be physically present, but emotionally, he's no longer there. His mind becomes fragmented, trying to manage small frustrations that were never resolved, trying to reorganize expectations that he can no longer sustain. And all this happens while he tries to maintain the appearance of normality. At this stage, he begins to accept things that he would never have tolerated before. Not because he lost his boundaries, but because he lost the energy to defend them. Discussions that he used to resolve clearly now become internal storms that he chooses to avoid. He doesn't want to fight, but he also doesn't want to swallow everything anymore. So he chooses silence, believing that this will preserve peace. But this silence is dangerous. It doesn't solve anything, it only accumulates. The relationship, without realizing it, enters fragile territory. The woman feels that he is distant, but interprets this distance as disinterest, coldness, or a change in priorities. And he, exhausted, can't find the words to explain that the problem isn't her, but the weight he has been carrying for months. And it is in this emotional limbo that many relationships begin to die, not for lack of love, but for lack of breathing room. After weeks or months of living on autopilot, the man begins to develop something he himself doesn't understand: emotional hypersensitivity. Small comments, altered tone of voice, jokes, disguised criticisms, everything starts to hurt more than it should. Not because he has become fragile, but because his inner limit is already saturated. This exaggerated sensitivity is not expressed in tears, but in withdrawal. He doesn't complain, he doesn't confront, he shuts down. And this is the most critical phase, because while he is silent, his partner interprets it in a completely opposite way. For her, silence means disinterest. For him, it is self-defense. It is also at this point that the man begins to avoid deep conversations, because he knows that any word can turn into an argument. He prefers to preserve the little emotional balance he still has, even if it means seeming cold or distant. This growing disconnection creates a dangerous cycle. The more she demands emotional presence, the more he withdraws, the more he withdraws, the more she intensifies the demand. The result is constant tension, even on quiet days. A feeling that something is about to explode, but no one knows exactly what. The man feels that he has no safe space to exist within the relationship, and this opens the door to the next, even deeper stage. There comes a point when a man simply gives up trying to explain what he feels. It's not a lack of will, much less contempt, it's exhaustion. He's tried talk before. He's tried to say he was tired, that he needed understanding, that certain attitudes were draining his strength. But whenever he opened his heart, he felt he wasn't truly heard, or he was interrupted, misinterpreted, diminished, invalidated. Over time, he concludes that talking is pointless. And when he reaches this conclusion, the relationship enters a zone of extreme risk, because his silence ceases to be protection and becomes definitive distancing. That's when short answers, lack of enthusiasm, and that distant look emerge, which many call coldness, but which is actually emotional survival. He doesn't want conflict. He doesn't want to try to prove what he feels anymore. He doesn't want to be the villain in arguments that never lead anywhere. He just wants peace. And when the only way to achieve that peace is by remaining silent, he chooses silence, even if it hurts him. The woman notices this change, but interprets it as detachment, when in reality, it is the last warning before something inside him breaks. When a man stops explaining, it's not because everything is okay. It's because he has reached the limit of what he can carry alone. At this stage, the man begins to imagine something he would never have considered before. What his life would be like if he were no longer in that relationship. It's not a fantasy of romantic escape with someone else, nor an immediate desire for separation. It's a search for relief, a silent thought that arises in the intervals of the day, in the hours of insomnia, in the long baths that become more frequent. He thinks about what it would be like to breathe without fear of making mistakes, without fear of being held accountable, without fear of any word of his becoming a reason for conflict. These fantasies don't arise because he has stopped loving, but because he has stopped feeling safe. He imagines conversations that don't end in recriminations, moments that don't require justification, light days as they once were. And the more he experiences these small mental escapes, the more perceptible the emotional distance between the two becomes. The partner, noticing that he is different, intensifies the demands. She feels she is losing something and tries to pull him back, without realizing that this movement pushes him even further away. He begins to avoid conversations, avoids discussing the relationship, avoids any situation that could cause strain. Deep down, he is already testing what life would be like without that emotional weight. And this phase is the beginning of the true rupture, not physical, but mental. There is a phase in which the man is still physically present, but emotionally absent. He participates in routines, answers questions, fulfills commitments, but each gesture seems automated, as if he were functioning in survival mode. He no longer argues, confronts, or tries to correct anything. Not because he doesn't care, but because he has realized that his attempts have always led to more strain than solutions. He conserves energy, as if he knows that any wrong move can create a storm. This is the stage of silent psychological exhaustion. He doesn't shout, doesn't explode, doesn't accuse. He simply shuts down inside. He observes, agrees, avoids conflicts. And the more he gives in, the more he loses his own identification with the relationship. He no longer sees himself as part of a we, because the we has ceased to be a safe place. He feels that if he continues trying to hold everything together alone, he will crumble. His partner notices this distance, but interprets it as coldness or indifference, and this generates even more tension. She demands attention, presence, and attitude, exactly what he no longer has the energy to offer. He lives in an emotional limbo where everything seems too heavy. Small conversations become exhausting. Simple activities seem too demanding. He is there, but he is not. And when the soul withdraws before the body, the relationship invisibly collapses. It is the critical point where the man no longer loses the relationship. He is simply waiting for the moment when it ends on its own. At this stage, there is something that few realize. Behind the distant behavior, there is a silent cry for help. He cannot formulate the words. He doesn't know where to begin. He doesn't want to seem weak. He doesn't want this to generate a bigger fight. So he keeps everything inside. But what he is really asking for is simple understanding. He wants someone to ask without accusing, to listen without interpreting, to welcome him without turning his pain into ammunition. He deeply desires to have a safe space where he can break down a little, but he has never been allowed that. And so, every time he thought about speaking, he put it off. Every time he thought about asking for help, he swallowed his words. Every time he thought about opening up, he remembered the times when it didn't work. Silence became a shield, and the shield became a prison. He doesn't want to leave, but he also doesn't know how to stay without losing what little he has left of himself. He doesn't want to be seen as the problem. He doesn't want to carry the blame for everything that went wrong, and so he remains silent. This silence, however, doesn't stem from indifference. It stems from fear. The fear of worsening what is already fragile. The fear of being ridiculed. The fear of opening up and discovering that the other side doesn't care as much as he imagined. And so, while she interprets quietness as disinterest, he lives an internal war to avoid falling apart. His mind tries to convince itself that it's just a phase, but his body feels the opposite. Weight on his chest, lack of energy, a deep tiredness that doesn't resolve itself by sleeping. He needs support, but receives demands. He needs understanding, but receives comparison. He needs calm, but receives pressure. And each emotional mismatch further deepens the abyss between what he feels and what he can say. Deep down, he hopes someone will notice. May someone notice the signs he hides so well. May someone see beyond the silence and recognize the pain he never named. But few can. Few understand that when a man is silent, it's not always because it doesn't matter. Sometimes it's because he's trying to protect himself from yet another frustration. This silent plea never arrives as words. It arrives as absence. And, if ignored, it becomes the announcement of the departure he fears but already foresees. The real end of many relationships doesn't happen in the last fight, the last dialogue, or the last request for change. The end happens before, when the man realizes that nothing he offers, effort, patience, dialogue, presence, will be enough. It's the moment he stops trying because he understands that trying only hurts him more. He doesn't blame anyone, doesn't create drama, doesn't issue ultimatums. He simply withdraws. And this withdrawal is not temporary. It's definitive. Because when a man decides to leave emotionally, he doesn't return the same way. He doesn't go back to the point where he was hurt. He doesn't reopen doors he had to close to survive. His mind reorganizes priorities, his heart rebuilds boundaries, and his energy is directed away from burnout. He doesn't leave because of a lack of love. He leaves because love alone can't carry him any longer. Interestingly, it's only at this point that many women realize the damage. It's when he's too calm, too distant, too tranquil. But this tranquility isn't peace, it's giving up. And there's no going back after this stage, because to return, he would have to break himself again. And this time he knows he wouldn't survive whole. If this content opened your eyes and brought clarity to emotional dynamics you may be experiencing, don't let it pass. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, activate the bell, comment below what made the most sense to you, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your interaction helps this message reach more people, and you continue to receive content that strengthens your mind, your value, and your emotional freedom.